Good evening. I told you a little earlier that Bible Q&A was going to be late this evening because I was going to see the movie Paul, Apostle of Christ, and that I would do a review of that once I got back from watching that movie. And so I have been to see it, and I have to say I am very pleasantly surprised by what I saw. It is, in my opinion, it is an excellent, excellent movie. It's not at all what I was expecting. From other Bible-based movies or movies that deal with biblical events or biblical text, we haven't had a very good record of getting movies that are dealing with biblical things that are really true to the text. And so when I went to see Paul this evening, I went to it a little skeptical of what I would find. One of the questions that I was very curious to see how the movie would handle was the topic of baptism. Because as I said earlier, everywhere Paul went and preached, people got baptized. And Paul preached baptism for the remission of sins. He didn't preach baptism because you've already been saved. He preached baptism for the remission of sins. And in the letter to the Romans, in Romans chapter 6, verses 3 and 4, Paul gives the definition of baptism there, that it is for newness of life. It's the death, burial, and resurrection of Christ that is being copied in our baptism, and we come up from the watery grave of baptism in newness of life. Well, I was a little skeptical at how a movie that is targeted at the population in general, more particularly probably mainstream denominationalism, I was curious at how the movie would deal with that subject. Well, when I went to see it, I was expecting it to be kind of a movie about the life of Paul, and so it would include his missionary journeys and his preaching and things like that. But that's not what it was about. It's really about the extra-biblical events that we know from history about Paul and his second Roman imprisonment and his execution in Rome. And so it really didn't get into the biblical text other than Paul recounting things to Luke. And I kind of have to be careful about what I say about the movie because I don't want to give any spoilers. When I was thinking about it earlier and said I would come back and do a review after seeing the movie, I didn't think there would be any spoilers. I mean, we know, we have the information. There's, not really any way to give spoilers about the life of Paul, is there? We know how the story ends. And so you do know how the movie ends with Paul's execution in Rome. But there's something about the ending of the movie that is very, very powerful. And the movie really focuses on the persecution of the church in Nero's reign there in Rome. The Roman persecution. There's Christians burning on stakes down the Roman roads, and Christians being thrown out into the arena, and it's really focused on that persecution and how the Christians in Rome were dealing with that persecution and the kind of struggles they were facing. And it really focuses on the struggle that Paul had, that we know he had from his writings, when he called himself the chief of sinners, for example. And even though he knew he was forgiven, and even though he knew that he had received the grace of God, as he tells Timothy that he was a pattern of God's grace, that if he could obey the gospel and be baptized into Christ for the remission of his sins, then anybody can, because he was someone who persecuted Christians. And so it really focuses on Paul's not really struggle, because of course he wasn't. It's not something he was struggling with. He knew the circumstances of it, I guess, or he had dealt with it, I guess I should say. But it was something that he did have problems with, and the movie portrays that. He had nightmares about the people he had persecuted before he was converted to Christ, and that was something that weighed on him. And we know, like I said, when he wrote to Timothy, he called himself the chief of sinners, and points out the reason for that being the persecution of the church. And so that is taking place with Paul as he's there in Roman imprisonment, and as Luke comes to him and tells him that Christians are really struggling and they need encouragement. And so Luke is spending time with Paul there and gathering the information for the latter part of the book of Acts. And so that's what's really going on in the movie, is Luke writing the part of Acts that is the work of the Apostle Paul. And so there's some recounting of that by Paul to Luke. And then at the end of the movie, there's also the inclusion there of 2 Timothy being carried out of Rome by the Christians that were fleeing the Roman persecution. They took the letter that Paul wrote to Timothy, where he says that he was being poured out as a drink offering as he was facing his execution. He wrote that letter to Timothy, and Luke and the other Christians took Acts and the second letter to Timothy out of Rome at that time. And so that's the setting of the movie. So it's really not dealing much with the biblical text. Of course, there's a lot of quoting, and Paul is quoting a lot of the things that he wrote, and also Luke, as Luke is talking to the other Christians there in Rome, encouraging them in this time of persecution. Of course, he's quoting things from Paul's sermons and things, and all of the quotes are good. They're good quotes, and they're even applied correctly for the most part, I think. I really didn't see anything in the movie, and like I said, I was very pleasantly surprised. Very, very pleasantly surprised. I thought it was an excellent movie. And I really didn't see anything in the movie that contradicted or compromised the biblical account. There may have been a couple of things that you might look at and you say, well, I kind of doubt they did that. Well, maybe they did, maybe they didn't. That's, those are those things that's open to speculation because we don't have the biblical account. But where the movie did touch on the biblical account from the book of Acts, and where the actors quoted from Paul's writings and preaching, it was good. And I had mentioned before that I went into it wondering, curious about how they would handle baptism. And there's really only one baptism, and the setting of the movie is such that there's not a lot of evangelism taking place. It's more about the Christians kind of huddled down there in Rome during the persecution. So it didn't really cover evangelism at all. And the only baptism in the movie is the baptism of Paul, when Ananias comes to him and talks to him and heals his eyes and baptizes Paul. And I was thrilled at the way that it portrayed Paul's baptism, because like I said, there's not been a very good run of biblically accurate movies. I thought the movie Risen, about the Roman soldier that was investigating the disappearance of the body of Christ, that was a good movie. There was a lot of things in that movie that really couldn't be meshed with the biblical text, though, even though it was still a good movie. But you go back and, to even the old classics like Ten Commandments and The Greatest Story Ever Told, and, these movies. And I remember seeing The Greatest Story Ever Told, and when Jesus went out to John at Jordan, John's standing out there in the Jordan up to his chest in the Jordan River, and he's got a gourd out there, and he's dipping up water out of the Jordan River and pouring it over people's heads. And it just made me mad, because it's not historically accurate, it's not biblically accurate, and why would somebody be standing in the middle of the river to dip water? It just didn't make... So, there's just been a lot in Bible-based movies that have been terrible. And this one is a rare exception to that. Like I said, nothing really contradicted anything, deviated. Where it did touch on the biblical record, it was good. And when Ananias baptized Paul, he immersed him he was 100% completely immersed. And it doesn't state it, but I guess the theatrics of it, the music and the scenery and everything gives a pretty clear indication that it was at that time when Ananias baptized Paul, that Paul really felt the burden lifted of his guilt for persecuting Christians, because it has Ananias coming to, and I hope I'm not spoiling it for anybody. It's a great movie. Go see it. You'll be glad you went to see it. It's a great movie. But Ananias comes to Paul, and he talks to him and says just exactly what the text says. Not all of it. Of course, it left out, arise and be baptized and wash away your sins. But it did include Ananias baptizing him. And when Ananias comes to him, Paul is just, he's just broken. He's blind. He's been fasting for 3 days, just like the biblical text says. But the way that the movie portrays it, it makes it clear that when Ananias came to Paul, there's a man sitting there that has realized that the very people that he has been persecuting, the way that he has been opposing, that he had been standing against the God that he believed he was serving, that he had been going contrary to God rather than serving God, and he's just a broken man, just devastated. And then Ananias comes to him, and it's just a really beautiful scene. It is a beautiful scene. Ananias comes to him, tells him what he tells him, and then baptizes him, and it's just beautiful. And the ending of the movie, and of course we know how the life of Paul ends. He's beheaded in Rome, but that's not the end of the movie. The ending of the movie is absolutely beautiful. There was a couple times in the movie when I got a little choked up. I'm not ashamed to admit it. I can tear up at a movie. There was a couple times in the movie where I got a little choked up, but the ending of the movie is what really got me. It's just a beautiful, beautiful ending to the movie. And I really, really liked it. I think this is the best Bible-based movie I have seen, including Passion of the Christ. I really liked Passion of the Christ, but there were things in Passion of the Christ that kind of, made me angry. The inserted Catholicism, total depravity, things like that were inserted in that movie, The Passion of the Christ, it really took away from the power of that movie. But I did like that movie, and being able to get that visualization in such historical accuracy of what the trial of Jesus and the scourging of Jesus and the crucifixion of Jesus would have been like. And it was from everything I've read, all the research I've done, everything I know about the scourging and the crucifixion, the Passion of the Christ was dead on accurate in depicting that. but it was not true to the biblical text in the dialogue and interaction between the people, and there was just flat out false doctrine inserted into the movie with the way that Judas was doing, and the implied total depravity of the little kids that were tormenting Judas, and those things. And so there were things in the Passion of the Christ, even though it was a great movie and valuable for that depiction to get the historical imagery that Christ would have suffered. There's nothing like that in Paul, Apostle of Christ. It's historically accurate, and everywhere it touches on the biblical text, it's biblically accurate. I really, unless I missed something, if you've seen it and I missed something there where there would have been some inaccuracy there that maybe got past me, I don't know. I didn't catch anything, and I went to it as a skeptic. Looking for things that would be a problem with the movie, and I didn't see any. I thought it was an excellent movie. Very, very good. I hope you'll take the opportunity to go see it. I highly recommend it. My whole family went. My daughter said that she loved it. It was an excellent movie. My wife loved it. It really is a very good movie. Well, that's pretty much all I had for this evening. I made the announcement earlier that that's what I was doing today, and that's why Bible Q&A wasn't on at the regular time. Good to see you, Matt. Glad you came back for this later broadcast of Bible Q&A. Todd, good to see you. Appreciate you being here. If you've seen Paul, Apostle of Christ, post your thoughts, your comments in the comment section below. If you have questions or comments for next week's Bible Q&A, go ahead and post those too. But I would really love to get your input, your feedback on what you thought of Paul, Apostle of Christ. If you haven't seen it, again, I would recommend it. If you're looking for a good movie to go see this weekend or sometime this week, that would be your best pick. There's not any other movies out there that would be a better pick than Paul, Apostle of Christ. Yeah, Todd, I did get your email, and I was just looking at those a minute ago before I started. I hadn't planned on getting into them tonight, but let me pull them up, look at them again real quick. Yeah, you had asked about some things about the book of Revelation, and I do want to get into those. The mark of the beast, 666, the not being able to buy and sell, those things. Those are good things, very good questions, good things to look at. And, especially with Mark of the Beast, people get really far out when it comes to the Mark of the Beast. I was checking out at the grocery store one day, and I handed the cashier my money, and when she punched it in, the change I was supposed to receive back was $6.66. And she wouldn't give it to me. She gave me an extra penny, which, I'm okay with that. Go ahead and give me an extra penny. I don't, that's fine with me. But she would not give me $6.66. And she was alarmed that it came up with that. And I just kind of chuckled and took the extra penny and went my way. But, people get really freaky. I've known of people that got credit cards that had 3 6s in the credit card number that sent it back to the credit card company and said, no, you got to issue me a new number. I'm not taking that number. Different things like that. Phone numbers where people got a phone number and it had 3 6s in it. And so they said, no, you got to change my number. I'm not taking that number. And that's not, there's nothing evil or supernatural about the number 666. There's a symbolism attached to that number that is very interesting, and we'll talk about that. I'll reserve these questions for next week's Bible Q&A. But Please let me know what your thoughts are on the movie. I don't want to go into too much detail in doing a review, other than to say I consider it a 5-star movie. We drove about 45 minutes to go see it, and it was well worth the drive. And we went to a theater that's more expensive than our local theater, but it's not playing at our local theater. But even though it was more expensive and a further drive, it was well worth it. I would see it again when it comes out on streaming or DVD. I'll definitely see it again and encourage other people to watch it. I thought it was a great movie. I'd love to get your feedback on it. If you haven't seen it yet, go see it. Let me know what you think. I appreciate y'all watching tonight. See you next week.